USD 290. TXT Trang 100%. They mocked my scrub uniform, just smiled and froze their 800 million fraudulent empire. My future mother-in-law uninvited me from her exclusive Christmas gala strictly because I was just a lowly hospital worker. She stood in the freezing, bitter snow outside the opulent St. Regis Hotel, wearing a diamond-encrusted emerald gown, and looked me up and down with an expression of unadulterated disgust. She explicitly told me my working-class background and my faded blue scrubs ruined the aesthetic of her elite, high society event. Then, with a sickeningly triumphant smile, she handed me a crumpled $50 bill and told me to call a cheap Uber to take myself back to the slums. I did not scream. I did not throw the money back in her contoured face. I simply offered her a polite, terrifyingly empty smile, nodded gracefully, and walked away quietly into the dark, freezing winter night. What the arrogant woman failed to realize was that her pristine, picture-perfect evening was about to collapse into an inescapable nightmare. In just a few short hours, the single most powerful billionaire in the city of Atlanta would suffer a catastrophic cardiac event right in the center of her extravagant party. And the hospital worker she had just so cruelly banished to the frozen alleyway would be the only person possessing the exact, specialized skills necessary to stand firmly between him and his immediate, terrifying death. Before I delve into this incredible story, please let me know where you are watching from in the active comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe immediately. If you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic people who underestimated your immense worth and cruelly treated you like you simply did not belong. My name is Maya, I am 29 years old, and my arrogant fiancé, Julian, honestly believed I was just an overworked, exhausted trauma nurse struggling to pay off my student loans. Julian, a aggressive, smooth-talking vice president at his family's prestigious wealth management firm, thought he had figured me out. He relied on his elite, old money pedigree and his Ivy League degree to constantly mansplain basic financial concepts to me over our tense dinner dates. He truly believed he was graciously rescuing a poor, uneducated girl from a lifetime of grueling, unglamorous physical labor. He had no idea that my faded blue hospital scrubs were merely a weekend uniform. He had no idea that Monday through Friday I sat behind a custom-built mahogany desk on the top floor of a towering downtown high-rise as the founder and CEO of a lucrative, rapidly expanding medical analytics and corporate compliance firm, valued at nearly $200 million. I kept my immense corporate empire hidden behind a complex web of fortified LLCs and aggressive blind trusts. I had spent my early 20s serving as a decorated combat medic overseas, an experience that forged my spirit into unbreakable steel. When I returned, I utilized my deep operational knowledge of the healthcare system to build a powerful software platform that explicitly detected corporate medical fraud. I did not need Julian's leveraged money. I did not need his toxic family's terrifyingly fragile approval. I volunteered for rigorous 12-hour trauma shifts at Atlanta General Hospital every single weekend, strictly because I loved the raw, unfiltered reality of saving human lives. It kept my rooted soul grounded in a world increasingly obsessed with superficial aesthetics. The night everything shattered was Christmas Eve. The temperature in Atlanta had plummeted to a bitter, bone-chilling 2 degrees. I had just finished a grueling trauma shift and was rapidly preparing to cover another major emergency rotation. Julian was attending his family's anticipated annual charity gala. It was the social event of the season for Atlanta's elite. I had originally been warmly invited, until his mother, Vivian, conveniently forgot to add my name to the final strict seating chart, loudly claiming a careless caterer error. Julian had casually told me not to take it personally, waving off my valid concerns. But when I got back to our shared luxury apartment, I immediately noticed Julian's critical heart medication sitting directly on the kitchen counter. Knowing how dangerous it could be for him to miss a strictly scheduled dose, I grabbed the bright orange prescription bottle, threw my heavy winter coat over my stained hospital scrubs, and drove straight to the Grand Hotel. The luxury cars lined the expansive valet entrance, and women in sparkling, expensive evening gowns stepped out, shivering elegantly. I knew well not to walk through the front doors looking the way I did, so I walked through the freezing wind around the building to the dark service entrance. I texted Julian that I was waiting quietly out back. 10 agonizing minutes slowly passed. Finally, the heavy metal door swung open, but it was not Julian who stepped out into the freezing alley. It was Vivian. She looked breathtakingly regal in her floor-length emerald gown, but the dark expression twisting her face was one of unadulterated venom. She did not invite me inside to warm up. She stood directly in the doorway, keeping me firmly trapped in the bitter cold. "What on earth are you doing here, Maya?" she demanded, looking me up and down as if I were a dirty, infectious stray animal. "Julian left his vital medication at the apartment," I replied, my voice calm despite the freezing wind whipping my hair. "I rushed over after my shift to bring it to him." Vivian snatched the bottle directly from my cold hand. Her sharp gaze swept over my faded scrubs and worn sneakers. "This pathetic outfit of yours," she loudly sneered, slowly shaking her styled head. "Good Lord, I am so glad I successfully managed to keep you off the guest list tonight. This is a high society donor gala, Maya. People with actual pedigree and legacy are in there. You went to a cheap public state college, and you empty disgusting bedpans for a living. You do not fit the aesthetic tonight, and you never will. You are just a lowly nurse." Before I could even offer a devastating response, Julian stepped out into the alley holding an expensive crystal glass of champagne. He quickly glanced back into the warm hotel hallway to make sure none of his wealthy friends were actively watching his deep humiliation. He did not look at me with profound gratitude. He looked at me with sheer annoyance. "Maya, why are you making a scene out here?" he snapped loudly. "My mother is stressed about hosting this major event. Why do you always have to take everything so personally and forcefully make yourself the pathetic victim?" He was gaslighting me right in front of his toxic mother. Vivian smiled a triumphant, razor-sharp smile. She slowly opened her glittering designer clutch, deliberately pulled out a crisp $50 bill, and held it out to me, as if she were pitying a homeless person on the street. "Take this and immediately call a cheap Uber," Vivian said. "Go right back to your little, pathetic apartment, and let the educated adults handle the real business tonight." I did not scream, I did not cry. I looked Julian dead in his weak, pathetic eyes and simply said, "I understand." I turned around and walked gracefully away, leaving them in their fragile, manufactured world of toxic debt. As I walked through the dark, icy alleyway toward my vehicle, my trained eyes suddenly caught a figure slumped against the rough brick wall. It was an older gentleman in a slightly worn, understated suit, clutching his chest and loudly gasping for air. My intense medical training instantly overrode my deep, personal anger. I sprinted toward him, pulling my heavy coat tightly around me. "Sir, I am a trained medical professional," I stated clearly, projecting unwavering authority. I rapidly pressed my fingers directly against his carotid artery. His pulse was dangerously thready and erratic. I quickly wrapped my own heavy winter coat around his trembling shoulders. I instructed him to match my deep breathing, effectively forcing him to look directly into my eyes, until his frantic, dangerous hyperventilation finally began to slow. "Thank you," he rasped, wiping a cold, dangerous sweat from his brow. I truly thought I was done for. The crowd inside was simply too overwhelming. "My vital medication is still inside. You are actively experiencing a significant, dangerous cardiac event," I told him firmly. "I am immediately calling an ambulance to rush you directly to Atlanta General." He shook his head. "No ambulance. I have a trained private driver waiting just one street over. I give you my word I will go straight to the elite hospital." I carefully helped the older man stand, keeping a firm grip on his arm. He looked at my faded hospital scrubs with sharp, analytical eyes. "You handled that terrifying situation with remarkable precision," he noted quietly. "What do you truly do for a living?" "I am just a nurse," I replied, the bitter sting of Vivian's cruel words still fresh. The older man smiled, a knowing, powerful smiles. People never respect the crucial oxygen in the room until they suddenly start choking. Never let anyone convince you that you are just anything. He returned my heavy coat and walked steadily away. I got directly into my car and drove straight to the hospital, unaware that the man I had just saved was Mr. Sterling, the influential billionaire who held the fate of Julian's fraudulent family directly in his hands. The emergency room on Christmas Eve was a terrifying war zone. The festive cheer stopped at the sliding glass doors of the trauma bay. The moment my feet hit the cold linoleum floor, I was no longer the unwanted, humiliated girlfriend. I was Maya, the elite charge nurse of Trauma Bay 1, and I owned the department. We spent the next 4 exhausting hours battling car pileups and severe respiratory failures. I barely had time to blink. Around 11 o'clock at night, the heavy double doors of the emergency room burst apart with a deafening crash. Code blue incoming. The frantic, desperate shout echoed loudly from the lead paramedic, who was straddling a fast-moving stretcher and pumping the chest of an unconscious patient. Older male, mid-60s, cardiac arrest transported directly from an exclusive VIP event at the St. Regis. He collapsed right in the main ballroom. We have no pulse. We swung the heavy stretcher directly into the trauma bay. The surgical lights snapped on, illuminating the pale, lifeless face of the patient. I froze for a fraction of a second. It was the older man from the freezing alley. It was Mr. Sterling. His slightly worn suit had been brutally ripped open by the frantic paramedics to attach the required defibrillator pads. His chest was already bruised from the aggressive CPR they had performed in the fast-moving ambulance. His face was devoid of color, bearing the terrifying gray ash that clearly signaled sudden death, was standing right in the room with us. Get him securely on the cardiac monitor right now. I barked loudly, immediately snapping back into reality and firmly shoving my personal recognition aside. Switching out on chest compressions right now. 1, 2, 3. I jumped directly onto the heavy step stool positioned next to the trauma bed, tightly locked my elbows, and threw my upper body weight into Mr. Sterling's chest, taking over the rhythmic, demanding CPR. The physical exertion was instantly immense, but my intense focus was, we urgently needed to immediately establish a viable airway and forcefully push life-saving cardiac drugs. But before I could shout my next medical order to the overwhelmed trauma team, an ear-piercing, unhinged scream shattered the intense, hyper-focused silence of the trauma room. Do not let her touch him. Get your filthy hands off of him, right this instant. I did not even need to quickly turn my head to recognize that shrill, entitled voice. It was Vivian. She came storming directly into the restricted emergency room, like a hurricane of expensive emerald green silk and flashy diamonds, ignoring the bright red signs explicitly restricting access to elite medical personnel only. She was not alone. Right on her aggressive heels was Julian, his custom tuxedo now slightly rumpled, his handsome face terribly pale and slick, with panicked sweat. Following closely behind them were Julian's hysterical sister, Chloe, and his slick-talking, arrogant brother, Darren, both fully decked out in ridiculous high-society evening wear that looked absurd against the sterile, blood-stained backdrop of a Level 1 trauma center. Security, I yelled loudly over my shoulder, maintaining my relentless rhythmic CPR compressions. Get these unauthorized, disruptive people out of my trauma bay right now. Do you have any idea who we are? Darren shouted, shoving a frantic triage nurse out of his path as he marched toward the sliding glass doors of our specific trauma room. He pointed an aggressive, manicured finger directly at the terrified medical staff. We are elite, top-tier financial donors to this hospital network. You work directly for us, and that important man currently dying on the table is our single most important financial guest. You better immediately treat him like royalty. Chloe was loudly sobbing hysterically, clutching her expensive designer ball gown and staggering wildly around the sterile hallway as if she were the dramatic one currently having a medical emergency. He cannot die, she wailed loudly, leaning against Julian. If he dies tonight, the wealth management fund collapses. We will lose the house, Julian. We will rapidly lose everything. Julian looked terrified. Not for the frail man currently actively dying on the cold trauma table, but strictly for his own precarious, fraudulent financial future. He grabbed his mother's arm, trying to pull her back, but Vivian shook him off. She marched right up to the transparent glass partition of Trauma Bay 1 and began pounding her diamond-ringed fists hard against the glass. I explicitly demand to speak to the chief of cardiology immediately. Vivian shrieked loudly, her shrill voice echoing down the long medical corridor and disturbing dozens of other sick patients. I want the head of the medical department down here this precise second. I refuse to let your regular, incompetent staff handle this sensitive situation. Do you hear me? We urgently need the best doctor in this city, not some uneducated, glorified clinic workers. Dr. Evans, the exhausted attending physician who had just finished successfully intubating our previous violent car crash victim, rushed into the trauma bay. He looked bewildered by the sudden influx of screaming socialites and expensive evening gowns. "Ma'am, you need to step back immediately," Dr. Evans strictly ordered, firmly moving his body to physically block Vivian from entering the sterile medical field. "We are currently running an active code blue. Your chaotic presence is directly endangering this critical patient's life." Endangering his life? Vivian scoffed loudly, her contorted face twisting into an ugly, terrifying mask of elitist rage. She pointed a sharp, manicured fingernail directly at me. I was still standing balanced on the heavy stool, intense sweat pouring down my neck as I pumped Mr. Sterling's fragile chest. "You are the incompetent people endangering his life. You literally have a common, uneducated street nurse actively performing CPR on a successful billionaire. She is a nobody. I literally just fired her directly from my elite gala an hour ago, strictly because she lacks the basic, necessary pedigree to gracefully pour expensive champagne. And now you are blindly letting her actively practice elite medicine on the single primary investor of our wealth management fund." Darren pushed his way forward, backing up his mother's toxic demands. He flashed a glossy, thick black business card at Dr. Evans as if it were some powerful kind of diplomatic immunity badge. "Listen to me closely," Darren sneered, his slick financial broker persona slipping to suddenly reveal raw, desperate panic. "That important man currently lying dead on the stretcher is actively holding $3 million of our family's corporate capital in his charitable accounts. If his heart permanently stops beating, our complex corporate structure goes into an immediate, irreversible freefall by tomorrow early morning. We will be bankrupt, so you better rapidly get that little pathetic scrub-wearing amateur off his chest and get a real doctor in here right now. Or I will personally maliciously sue this hospital network straight into the frozen ground." I continuously maintained my deep compressions, ignoring the intense burning ache radiating in my strained shoulders. 1, 2, 3, 4, my intense eyes stayed locked onto the bright cardiac monitor. The jagged, chaotic lines of sudden ventricular fibrillation danced across the dark digital screen. He was still actively dying, and these horrifying people did not care about him whatsoever as an actual living human being. They only exclusively saw a lucrative walking bank account. They were watching a terrified man fight for his last ragged breath. And their only single pathetic concern was how his impending death would directly impact their luxurious lifestyle and their fraudulent financial investment portfolios. "Julian!" Vivian screamed, turning to her profoundly weak son, who was actively cowering fearfully near the main nurse's station. "Do something right now. Throw your weight around, explicitly tell them who your successful father was. Make them listen to you." Julian stepped hesitantly, weakly forward. He looked at me, his wide eyes pleading as if he fully expected me to suddenly bow to his mother's insane demands simply because we currently shared an expensive apartment. "Maya, please," Julian begged pathetically, his shaky voice cracking with weakness. "Just step away from the active trauma table. Let the educated, real doctors carefully handle this." You do not understand how much money is at incredible stake here. Mr. Sterling is our golden goose. If you mess this up, you will ruin my prestigious family. The sheer audacity of his request made my blood boil. He wanted me to intentionally let Mr. Sterling die just to explicitly protect their toxic, leveraged wealth. I urgently need an immediate pulse check right now. I shouted loudly to Dr. Evans, ignoring Julian's pathetic whining. I abruptly stopped my compressions for 3 long seconds. The bright digital monitor flatlined. A solid, continuous beep filled the quiet room. A systole, he had lost all electrical activity inside his failing heart. No pulse, doctor, Evans grimly confirmed. Immediately resume aggressive compressions. Quickly charge the heavy paddles to 300 joules. Forcefully push another milligram of strong epinephrine right now. No, no, no! Chloe shrieked from the crowded hallway, dramatically dropping to her expensive knees directly on the cold linoleum floor. The offshore accounts are going to freeze, Darren. The illegal offshore accounts are going to lock, if he is officially legally declared dead.
Shut up, Chloe.
Darren snapped viciously, his sophisticated polished veneer shattered. Keep pumping until the federal bank fully opens on early Monday morning. Just keep actively pumping until the bank safely opens. Darren's horrific words hung in the sterile medical air, an sickening testament to the moral bankruptcy of Julian's toxic family. But I had no extra time to process their unfathomable greed or the sheer depravity of their twisted priorities. The harsh, demanding reality of the intense trauma bay required my undivided focus. The continuous flat drone of the cardiac monitor pierced through the ambient chaos of the emergency room. AN flatline. Suddenly, the blaring overhead intercom blared loudly to sudden life with a priority medical page. Doctor, Evans stat to operating room 3 immediately, internal hemorrhage actively coding. Doctor, Evans stat to OR 3 right now. The critical teenage car crash victim we had successfully stabilized just mere minutes prior was currently actively crashing upstairs. And Dr. Evans was currently the only senior attending trauma surgeon available in the hospital tonight. Dr. Evans looked torn, his shaking hands hovering over the sterile medical equipment cart, his panicked eyes darting back and forth between the flatlining billionaire dying on our table and the flashing bright red emergency light loudly blaring on the wall. He was effectively trapped. If he stayed here, the innocent teenager upstairs would rapidly bleed to death right on the active operating table. If he left immediately, the billionaire Mr. Sterling was left in the strict hands of the busy nursing staff and a terrified first-year medical resident. Go right now, I roared loudly, locking my strong elbows and throwing my upper body weight into another rapid cycle of deep, bone-crushing chest compressions. I have this critical code. Go actively save the innocent kid right now. Doctor, Evans bolted from the trauma room without a single second glance, leaving a wide-eyed, trembling first-year resident, Dr. Singh, currently standing frozen near the top head of the trauma bed. Mr. Sterling's fragile life was now fully inside my capable hands. The elite, toxic family clustered in the tight corner of the busy trauma bay, their unhinged screams escalating into a deafening, useless cacophony of panic. Chloe was actively hyperventilating into her expensive designer clutch, while Darren paced back and forth, pulling at his custom tuxedo bow tie and loudly shouting empty, aggressive legal threats at the sterile ceiling. Julian actively stood plastered flat against the heavy sliding glass door, paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated fear, offering no help or basic comfort to anyone. Quickly charged the heavy defibrillator to a full 200 joules. I loudly barked directly to the capable junior nurse, sweat pouring down my forehead and stinging my eyes. Actively charging, she replied loudly, hitting the bright yellow button on the machine. But instead of the familiar, high-pitched whine of the heavy capacitors fully loading, a harsh aerotone suddenly loudly sounded. The bright digital screen flashed a terrifying red warning symbol. It is actively giving a severe fault code. The junior nurse loudly yelled, her anxious voice pitching up with rapidly rising panic. The primary internal battery is dead, and the main wall outlet cord is severely frayed. The defibrillator is actively malfunctioning. It will not properly hold a charge. Swap the heavy cables right now. I ordered, my crystal clear voice cutting through the noise with unyielding authority. Do not panic. If the primary medical unit is dead, grab the heavy backup medical unit directly from Trauma Bay 2 immediately. Go right now. She sprinted out of the loud room. I did not miss a single rapid beat of my aggressive, deep compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. My strained shoulders burned with the intense buildup of lactic acid, and my lower spine screamed in protest, but I was in my element. This was my domain. The intense physical toll of performing continuous CPR is immense. But I pushed through the intense pain, forcefully driving my strong palms hard directly into the center of his fragile chest to manually forcefully push oxygenated blood through his severely failing heart and directly up into his oxygen-starved brain. "Sing!" I loudly shouted, snapping the frozen medical resident out of his terrified stupor. Stop staring at the flat line and actively expertly manage the critical airway. Bag him one strong breath every 6 tight seconds. Do not hyperventilate him. Closely watch the critical end tidal CO2 directly on the capnography monitor. I urgently need a intraosseous line fully established directly in his right heavy tibia immediately. We cannot wait for slow peripheral IV access. Dr. Singh blinked hard, nodded rapidly, and finally sprang into action, swiftly grabbing the heavy IO drill to forcefully establish a direct medical line right into the deep bone marrow for rapid medication delivery. Forcefully push 1 strong milligram of epinephrine, I commanded the busy medication nurse currently standing to my left. Directly follow it rapidly with 300 heavy milligrams of amiodarone. Extensively flush the tight lines wide open. We need to jumpstart this critical heart right now. The heavy atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly tense. A extreme pressure cooker, where every single critical second stripped away another percentage of survival. The pungent smell of sterile iodine, mixed with the sharp metallic tang of raw blood and the heavy, expensive designer perfume, radiating from the loudly screaming socialites tightly in the corner. Their disruptive presence was a toxic distraction. Vivian could no longer effectively contain her unhinged, terrifying panic over her precious wealth management fund. Seeing the primary defibrillator fail and watching the attending chief physician run out of the room had shattered her carefully manicured composure. She breached the invisible sterile medical barrier of the trauma bay, her emerald green ball gown knocking over a full tray of sterile surgical medical instruments. The heavy metal tools clattered loudly onto the bloody linoleum floor. "What is happening?" Vivian shrieked, her contoured face twisted into an ugly, terrifying mask of unfiltered terror and raw elitist rage. "Why did that incompetent doctor leave? Why is the expensive machine broken? Do something. Ma'am, you cannot be currently in this restricted zone," the triage nurse pleaded, actively moving quickly to physically block Vivian from reaching the critical trauma bed. Vivian shoved the innocent triage nurse aside with surprising aggressive force, her diamond necklaces loudly clinking wildly. She lunged directly toward the top head of the trauma bed, her manicured eyes wide and manic. She loudly reached out and grabbed my right forearm just as I was pushing strongly down for another deep compression. Her sharp manicured fingernails and heavy diamond rings dug through my thin medical scrub top and painfully into my skin. "Get your filthy, uneducated hands off of him right now." Vivian screamed at the top of her lungs, vicious spittle flying from her painted lips. "You are literally just a pathetic nurse. You do not know what you are doing. You are actively going to kill him and ruin my prestigious family. Get away from him right now." I forcefully ripped my bruised arm out of her frantic grasp without breaking my CPR rhythm for even a fraction of a single precise second. My intense eyes locked directly onto hers, and all the suppressed intense anger, grit, and deep working-class resilience I had built over my complete life flared in my gaze. I did not actively back down. I did not cower. I stared right through her superficial, fake, wealthy facade and actively saw nothing but an empty, desperate, pathetic woman. "Security!" I roared loudly, my calm voice booming with such overwhelming aggressive authority that it startled even the trained medical staff. Two large, muscular hospital security guards, who had been actively trying to wrangle Darren currently in the hallway, instantly stepped through the sliding glass doors. They assessed the chaotic medical situation in a precise split second. "Get these unauthorized people out of my restricted trauma bay right this second," I commanded, pointing a blood-stained, gloved finger directly at Vivienne, and then directly at Julian, who was currently cowering near the large medical sink. "I do not actively care who they are. I do not care how much stolen money is inside their fake bank accounts. I do not care what expensive designer clothes they currently wear. In here, I am the law. Get them out right now." The trained security guards did not hesitate. The much significantly larger guard grabbed Vivienne firmly by the tight arms of her expensive evening gown, ignoring her outraged loud shrieks about expensive lawsuits and powerful hospital board members. The second guard grabbed Julian by the crisp collar of his expensive custom-tailored tuxedo, forcibly marching him backward, directly into the hallway. "Take your filthy hands off my successful mother," Julian stammered weakly, stumbling over his polished dress shoes as the strong guard shoved him out the heavy glass door. "You cannot treat us like this. I can and I will," I actively shouted back as the heavy glass doors finally slid shut, sealing the elite family outside in the hallway where they belonged. With the toxic distraction finally removed from the room, the temperature in the trauma bay seemed to instantly drop, replaced by an intense laser-focused clinical clarity. The junior nurse sprinted back into the room, hauling the fully functional backup defibrillator. "Fresh pads are on. The unit is actively charging," she yelled. "Clear," I ordered, pulling my hands away from his sternum and taking a step back. "Everyone clear the bed right now." The intense electrical current ripped through Mr. Sterling's failing body, causing his frail back to arch sharply off the mattress. I immediately jumped back onto the step stool and resumed my flawless, aggressive chest compressions. The intense adrenaline was pumping through my veins like liquid fire. "Push another milligram of EP right now," I barked. "Come on, fight back. Do not let these horrific people win." 10 agonizing seconds passed. Then 20. "Hold your compressions," I ordered, pressing my fingers firmly against the side of his pale neck. The room held its collective breath. The chaotic lines of ventricular fibrillation vanished. For 2 agonizing seconds there was a flat line, then a distinct spike appeared on the green grid. Another sharp spike. The bright spikes rapidly formed a steady, rhythmic mountain range across the screen. I pressed harder against his carotid artery. I finally felt it. "A real pulse. We have a viable pulse," I announced loudly, letting out a breath. "We officially have full return of spontaneous circulation." "His racing heart rate is 92, Dr. Singh let out a loud cheer, slumping against the supply cart. I swiftly grabbed my stethoscope and listened closely to his bruised chest, confirming the steady, mechanical beating of his fully restarted heart. I had successfully pulled the powerful billionaire back from the brink of immediate death. "Rapidly start a central line," I instructed. "Let us safely prep him for urgent transport to the cardiac catheterization lab upstairs. He is stable for right now. Exceptional work, everyone." I stepped down from the stool, my body trembling with physical exhaustion. I stripped off my bloody gloves. Through the sliding glass doors, I could clearly see Vivienne, Julian, Chloe, and Darren pressing their pale faces against the thick glass, their wide eyes filled with disbelief. They had fully expected me to fail. They had expected the uneducated working-class girl to crumble under the pressure of their high society demands. Instead, they had just silently watched me orchestrate an undeniable medical miracle. They watched as the nurse they had banished to the freezing alleyway single-handedly saved the powerful billionaire they were willing to let die. I walked deliberately over to the heavy glass door, looking directly through the transparent barrier, straight at Julian. His custom tuxedo was ruined, his face a striking portrait of humiliation and profound shock. I did not offer a single smile. I simply offered him a piercing look of unwavering disgust. turned my back on his toxic family, and went back to charting vital signs. I had saved a vital human life, and in the process I had shattered their fragile illusion of elite superiority. The bright morning sun rapidly breached the Atlanta skyline, casting harsh shadows across the hospital parking garage. My 12-hour trauma shift was finally over. My faded blue scrubs still smelled of sterile iodine and the sharp metallic tang of raw blood. I sat alone in my sedan, letting the profound silence wash over me. But as I pulled into the pristine driveway of the upscale midtown luxury apartment Julian and I shared, a heavy knot of dread formed in my stomach. Julian was pacing the length of our spacious living room. He looked disheveled and profoundly furious. The exact moment he heard the deadbolt click, he spun around, locking his dark, furious eyes onto mine. His gaze was devoid of affection. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his sharp voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "I just finished my emergency shift, Julian. I was saving critical human lives." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Saving human lives. Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were throwing a pathetic, jealous temper tantrum right in the center of a sensitive medical crisis." I froze dead in my tracks. "Are you honestly serious right now?" I manually restarted Mr. Sterling's stopped heart. "Your unhinged mother was assaulting me while I was performing deep chest compressions." Julian closed the distance between us, jabbing a stiff finger directly in my direction. "Do not dare put this disaster on my perfect mother, Maya. You were embarrassed that she rightfully turned you away from the elite saint. Raja's gala, you were bitter because you did not have a proper elite invitation. So when the most important man in our financial portfolio arrived in your emergency room, you saw a golden opportunity. You used a dying man as a pathetic prop to enact your petty ghetto revenge against my elite family." The sheer audacity of his vicious words literally took my breath away. He was rewriting reality, twisting my undeniable professional competence into a malicious, unhinged narrative. "You always have to be the hero, don't you?" Julian scoffed loudly, waving his manicured hand dismissively. "You always have to prove that the scrappy working-class girl is smarter than the educated elites. You humiliated my mother in front of the hospital administrators. You had security drag her out, like a common criminal. Do you have any idea how much permanent damage you did to our family?" Julian stepped right into my personal space, towering over me. "This is why my mother did not want you at the gala, Maya. You lack restraint. You lack class. You are an unhinged, jealous woman. I am waiting for an apology. My mother is currently having a severe nervous breakdown because her flawless reputation is hanging by a thread. I want you to drive over to the family mansion at 2 o'clock this afternoon. You are going to march into my mother's private study, get down on your knees, and beg for her forgiveness. And if you refuse, this engagement is over." He grabbed his car keys, slammed the heavy front door, and left me standing alone in the living room. The silence was heavy. He thought I was weak. He genuinely believed the threat of a broken engagement would bring me to my knees in submission. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let the scalding water wash away the physical grime of the emergency room. My mind formulated a different plan. I was not going to grovel, I was going to observe. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the sprawling family mansion. The heavy oak door swung open to reveal an older maid. "Mrs. Vivian is currently receiving her afternoon deep tissue massage in the East Wing," the maid said quietly. "She requested that you wait for her in Mr. Julian's private study." I walked down the marble hallway and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to Julian's study. The room smelled of expensive scotch. I sat down in the oversized leather executive chair behind his desk. Right in the center of the dark wood desk sat his personal iPad. The screen suddenly glowed bright white with an iMessage notification from Darren. "Did the nurse sign the prenup yet? We need her blind to the Sterling accounts." I stared at the glowing letters. The nurse, not Maya. The prenuptial agreement Julian had pushed across our kitchen counter last week was suddenly cast in a terrifying, sinister new light. I tapped the screen. The iPad was unlocked. I opened the group chat named The Board. The participants were Julian, Darren, Chloe, and Vivian. I began scrolling up through the lengthy thread. It was a digital ledger of fraud, Darren wrote. Sterling is demanding a full audit of his charitable trusts. If he sees the capital transfers we made to cover Chloe's offshore debts, we are ruined. He will pull his $3 million and trigger a federal investigation. Vivian's chimed in. Julian, if you propose to her, play the devoted family man settling down with a noble, selfless nurse. It will charm Sterling. He will delay the audit for a wedding. My engagement was a fabricated public relations stunt to cover up their financial embezzlement. Chloe had written, she is useful, a working-class mule who will gladly pay half the mortgage while you live your real life. I opened a linked folder labeled Sterling Contingency. The spreadsheet revealed the terrifying truth. Vivian and her children were bankrupt. The sprawling mansion was leveraged with 3 secondary mortgages. They were actively laundering $3 million from Mr. Sterling's charitable foundation, and listed as the primary director and sole liable party for every single fraudulent shell company. Was my name, Maya. They planned to bury the ownership transfers deep within the prenuptial agreement. They fully intended to frame me for corporate embezzlement and send me to federal prison so they could walk away clean. I pulled out my cell phone and photographed every single piece of evidence on the iPad screen. I took dozens of high-resolution pictures, creating a complete digital archive of their criminal conspiracy, and emailed them directly to the encrypted servers of my corporate analytics firm. Right on cue, Julian stepped into the room, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing across his lips. Are you ready to go apologize and beg for your place back in this family? I stood up slowly, looking him dead in the center of his eyes. I am not apologizing to your mother, I am done. His handsome face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. You stupid, arrogant girl, if you walk out that door, this engagement is permanently over. I bypassed him, marching straight out of the mansion. I got into my sedan and drove rapidly away. The trap was officially set. The next morning, I woke up in the silent bedroom of my apartment. I opened my laptop, fully intending to contact a federal whistleblower attorney. But a bold red notification sat at the top of my inbox from the Atlanta General Hospital Board of Directors. The subject line read, Urgent notice of immediate disciplinary action and professional license suspension. Vivienne had bypassed standard hospital protocol. She had filed a formal, expedited complaint alleging that I had physically assaulted her in the trauma bay and displayed gross medical negligence. Pending a formal emergency hearing, my nursing license was instantly suspended. I was barred from hospital property. They thought that by destroying my livelihood, they would force me into groveling submission. They expected me to come crawling back and sign their criminal prenuptial agreement just to survive. But they had just made a fatal, irreversible miscalculation. By filing a formal complaint, Vivienne had unknowingly created a publicized, official, and legally binding forum. She wanted to publicly humiliate me in front of the hospital administrators. I was not going to cower. I was going to walk into that disciplinary hearing, look Vivienne directly in the eye, and drop a nuclear bomb on the Sterling Wealth Management Fund. She had no idea she had just invited an apex predator directly into the room. The executive boardroom on the top floor of Atlanta General Hospital was designed to be intimidating. It was a glass-walled suite overlooking the sprawling city, furnished with heavy mahogany tables and ergonomic leather chairs. As I pushed open the heavy double doors, the suffocating weight of elite arrogance pressed down on me instantly. The room was packed. Dr. Thorne, the chief medical administrator, sat at the head of the table, flanked by the hospital's senior legal counsel. But they were not the ones running this meeting. Vivienne sat comfortably near the center, checking her flawless makeup in a silver compact mirror, clearly bored by the mere formality of the proceedings. Darren lounged in his chair, tapping a gold pen against the polished wood with a rhythmic, impatient beat. Julian refused to look at me, keeping his eyes firmly fixed on his manicured hands. And sitting directly beside Vivienne was a team of 3 aggressive, silver-haired corporate attorneys, brought in specifically to finalize the slaughter of my career. They wanted a spectacle. They wanted to see the poor, uneducated working-class girl break down and cry. They wanted the supreme satisfaction of watching me sign away my rights, my voice, and my dignity just to survive. Doctor, Thorne cleared his throat nervously, looking visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Maya, please take a seat, he said quietly. We are here today to discuss the formal complaint filed by Mrs. Sterling regarding the events in the trauma bay on Christmas Eve. The allegations of physical assault and gross medical negligence are severe. Before Dr. Thorne could even finish his opening statement, Vivian's lead attorney, a slick man with a predatory smile, leaned forward and placed a sleek silver folder directly onto the mahogany table. He slid it across the polished wood until it rested in front of my hands. He placed a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen right next to the signature line. Dr. Thorne, if I may, Julian interjected, his voice dropping an octave to convey a deep, manufactured sorrow. I know Maya better than anyone here. I believe she was simply overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. My family does not want to see her life ruined because of one stupid, jealous mistake. Julian stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He looked down at me with an expression of profound, fake pity. Maya, I convinced Darren's legal team to draft this document. It is a standard non-disclosure agreement. It formally dissolves our engagement quietly, without any messy public spectacle. It explicitly waives your right to any of our family assets, properties, or trusts. And most importantly, it legally binds you to strict, permanent silence regarding anything you may have heard, seen, or assumed about our family's private finances. The trap had finally snapped shut. The NDA was not about the fake assault. The NDA was the point of this elaborate, terrifying ambush. They needed me legally gagged before they could safely dump the $3 million of stolen charity funds into the shell companies registered in my name. They were actively using the threat of my nursing license to blackmail me into signing away my right to defend myself against federal embezzlement charges. Vivian smiled sweetly, leaning across the table. Sign the contract, Maya, she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. If you sign it, I will immediately drop the medical complaint. You get to keep your little nursing license, you get to walk away, go back to your miserable shifts, and we never have to see each other again. But if you decide to be stubborn, we will bury you in legal fees. We will make sure the medical board permanently revokes your license. The choice is yours, survival or destruction. The sheer arrogance of her words echoed in my mind. She thought my license was a trivial, pathetic little hobby. She thought she could leverage my life's work to cover up her desperate theft. I looked down at the thick premium paper. I looked at the gold-plated pen. Every single person in the glass boardroom held their breath. They were leaning forward, their greedy, expectant eyes glued to my hand. They needed that signature to save their crumbling, fraudulent empire. Slowly, deliberately, I reached my hand forward. My fingers were steady, my pulse was calm. I picked up the heavy gold pen. I held it steady, hovering less than an inch over the bold black line that demanded my signature. The silence stretched out thick, oppressive, and suffocating. Then, I simply opened my fingers. The expensive fountain pen dropped. It hit the polished mahogany table with a sharp, definitive clatter. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense room. The collective gasp from the legal team was audible. I did not break eye contact with Julian. I watched the arrogant, victorious smirk freeze on his handsome face. Using just my index finger, I slowly and deliberately pushed the non-disclosure agreement back across the table. I do not negotiate with criminals, I said, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear precision. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Vivian lost her mind. She slammed both her hands down on the table and shot up from her chair, her face turning a violent shade of crimson. Call security, she shrieked, devoid of her usual polished grace. Call the police right now, and have this deranged woman arrested. Terminate her immediately. The boardroom descended into unmanageable chaos. Darren's lawyers began shouting rapid legal threats. attempting to bully the board into compliance. The HR director reached for the landline phone. I remained seated, still, calm, watching their fake empire begin to burn. Before the HR director could lift the receiver, the heavy double mahogany doors of the boardroom were pushed wide open with such commanding, terrifying force that they slammed loudly against the glass walls. The room froze. Vivian's shrill screaming abruptly cut off. Standing in the doorway was a vision of undeniable authority. It was a stunning, commanding black woman, dressed in a razor-sharp, bespoke crimson power suit. Her posture was flawless, her expression unbothered, and her dark, intelligent eyes swept across the chaotic boardroom with cold, calculating authority. It was Nia Sterling, the billionaire's daughter. She was not merely a generous donor. She was the founder and CEO of a private equity firm that had just recently finalized the acquisition of a majority stake in this exact hospital system. She literally owned the building. She owned the board of directors. The sheer magnitude of her presence sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Naya walked slowly, deliberately toward the head of the table. Her gaze locked dead onto Vivian. "Sit down, Vivian," Nia commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a razor-sharp edge that sliced straight through the heavy tension. Vivian blinked rapidly, her smile faltering. Nia reached into her tailored crimson jacket, pulled out a small metallic USB drive, and slammed it down onto the center of the table. The sharp crack made Julian physically flinch. My private security team pulled the raw, unedited surveillance footage from the hotel ballroom where Father collapsed, Nia stated, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. She locked eyes with Vivian. When my father hit the floor, it was not an immediate medical response. The footage clearly shows the hotel manager grabbing his radio to call for an ambulance. And it shows you, Vivian, physically grabbing the manager's arm. You ordered him to delay the emergency call for 10 minutes. You looked him dead in the eye and told him that having paramedics rushing through the main doors would ruin the aesthetic of your charity gala. A collective, horrifying gasp swept through the glass boardroom. Doctor. Thorne stared at Vivian in disbelief. You prioritized a champagne reception over my father's life, Naya stated, devoid of mercy. If this nurse had not ignored your ridiculous, narcissistic orders and initiated chest compressions, my father would be lying in a morgue right now. Maya is the only reason he is breathing today. Vivian collapsed into her chair, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The high-priced attorneys suddenly began furiously packing up their binders, instantly realizing their retainer was not nearly high enough to cover this level of legal exposure. The room sat in paralyzed shock, but I was not finished. The surgical precision of my revenge was only half complete. They had brought me into this room to destroy my life, and I fully intended to return the favor. I stood up from my chair. I picked up my cell phone, walked toward the 80-inch presentation screen mounted on the wall, and plugged my device into the digital podium. Since we are sharing footage today, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the stunned silence, let us take a detailed look at the Sterling family finances. Julian suddenly leaped from his chair, his eyes widening in unfiltered panic. Maya, stop, do not do this. Sit down, Julian, Nia snapped. Julian froze instantly, terror locking his joints, and sank back into his seat. The enormous screen illuminated the boardroom. I brought up my secure cloud folder and opened the high-resolution screenshots. The cruel text messages filled the 80-inch screen in undeniable detail. For the past 2 years, the Sterling family has subjected me to relentless emotional abuse, I explained, pointing to the screen. But I was not just their favorite joke, I was the designated fall guy for a criminal enterprise. I opened the offshore wire transfer logs in the classified bank statements. The intricate rows of undeniable financial data glowed brightly. Darren's face instantly drained of all blood. He looked like a man actively experiencing a coronary event. Darren and Julian have been systematically laundering money through the Sterling Wealth Management firm, I explained with clinical detachment. They have been actively siphoning funds from Mr. Sterling's charitable foundation. $3 million is missing. Nia Sterling's posture went rigid. Her dark eyes narrowed into dangerous slits as she read the ledgers detailing the exact theft of her father's philanthropic legacy. I swiped to the final, most devastating document, the fake LLC registration forms. To protect their bankrupt legacy, they created shell companies to hide the stolen charity funds. And as you can clearly see, they forged my signature to make me the primary director and sole liable party. Julian proposed to me specifically to frame the clueless nurse for corporate embezzlement and send me to federal prisons so they could walk away clean. The elite, untouchable facade of the Sterling family shattered. The reality of their crimes was now displayed in high definition for the most powerful woman in the hospital to process. Vivian began hyperventilating, clutching at her throat. Darren shot up from his chair, knocking it over backward with a loud crash. "This is a setup," he yelled, his voice cracking with shrill hysteria. "She hacked my private server." Julian scrambled to his feet, his arrogant composure evaporated. He looked at Darren with feral desperation, his survival instincts overriding family loyalty. "Do not drag me down with you, Darren." Julian screamed. "This was your idea. You said the nurse was too stupid to figure it out." "You spineless coward," Darren roared. "You set up the shell companies. You forged her signature." The two brothers, stripped of their bespoke suits and elite pedigrees, devolved into animals. Darren lunged across the polished mahogany table, grabbing Julian by the lapels. Julian swung his fist in a blind panic, catching Darren squarely in the jaw. The sickening crack of bone hitting bone echoed sharply through the glass boardroom. They crashed onto the floor, grappling, punching, and tearing at each other like rabid dogs in the exact center of the pristine executive suite. Blood splattered onto the plush carpet, and the grand illusion of the Sterling family legacy burned to ash in seconds. "Get security up here right now," Dr. Thorne shouted. The HR director dialed the emergency line for the hospital police detachment. Nia Sterling stood still at the head of the table, watching the two men tear each other apart. She simply turned her head, looking at me with an expression of profound, silent respect. I reached out and unplugged my phone from the projector cable. I slipped the device safely back into my pocket, picked up my black leather portfolio, and turned my back on the carnage. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had obliterated everything they held dear. I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, the sound of police sirens already beginning to wail in the distance. The fallout from that afternoon was brutal and merciless. The FBI took over the investigation within 48 hours, seizing every hard drive and offshore bank account linked to the firm. Darren and Julian were formally indicted on multiple federal charges of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. Their assets were frozen. They traded their bespoke tailored suits for standard issue orange jumpsuits, facing decades in a federal penitentiary. Vivian Sterling experienced a catastrophic social and financial annihilation. Without the stolen charity funds, her fake empire collapsed overnight. The bank formally foreclosed on her sprawling mansion. She was brutally and publicly evicted, shunned by the people she had spent her life trying to impress. Chloe, who had gleefully referred to me as a working-class mule, was abruptly forced out of her upscale apartment. To avoid bankruptcy, the girl who had sneered at my grueling 12-hour shifts was forced to take a minimum-wage job scanning barcodes at a discount retail store, working double shifts just to pay off the interest on her designer handbags. 6 months later, Mr. Sterling made a complete and miraculous recovery. I was summoned to the hospital executive suite once again. This time, I walked into a brightly lit office where Nia Sterling sat waiting for me. "You saved my father's life," Nia said. "You protected his charitable legacy. We need leaders like you." She handed me an official promotion. I was formally named the new director of emergency nursing for the Atlanta General Hospital System. But Nia was not finished. She and her father had liquidated the remaining assets of the Sterling Wealth Management firm to establish a new $5 million scholarship foundation, explicitly designed to fully fund the medical education of working-class women. and she wanted me to sit on the board of directors. I stood on the hospital helipad later that evening, the crisp Atlanta wind whipping around my white lab coat. I looked out over the sprawling glowing skyline of the city. They said I was just a nurse. They looked at my working-class background and said I did not belong in their pristine elite world. They were right about one thing: I do not belong in their world of fake wealth, toxic debt, and cruel manipulation. I belong right here in the real world, a world where we save lives, not destroy them. A world where integrity actually means something. Have you ever been underestimated by toxic people who thought they could control you? Tell me how you walked away in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous move you can make is simply smiling quietly and letting them build their own trap. It is fascinating how the universe inherently balances the scales of justice. When you possess the immense patience to simply let the truth reveal itself naturally over time.